The rule of thirds is one of the first compositional techniques taught to photographers and filmmakers. But what exactly is it? Why does it work? And most importantly, when should you break it? This technique was first ever recorded in the 18th century. John Thomas Smith wrote about the rule of thirds in his book Remarks on Rural Scenery. Instead of dividing art pieces into halves for balance, Smith suggested breaking the art into thirds, emphasizing the importance of placing the most essential elements along these lines or at the intersections. This shifted many art pieces from a rigid, centered composition to an off-center balance, creating visual interest and movement. As photography emerged in the 19th century, early photographers took on a lot of the design principles used by painters to create their images. This approach carried into filmmaking as cinema developed in the 20th century. Directors used the rule to frame actors, landscapes, and key objects, creating an immersive experience for the viewer. Whether you're a painter, photographer, or filmmaker, every artist wants to tell a strong story. Just like an interesting story uses conflict, an interesting frame needs something to draw in the audience. Placing key elements along the grid or at the intersections naturally guides the viewer's eye through the scene. Rather than settling immediately in the middle, the off-center subject causes someone to explore the entire frame. It creates an element of tension, of asymmetry, and subconsciously the viewer solves this tension by looking around the frame. When you view pieces of real life, you don't typically perceive the world in perfectly centered compositions. The rule of thirds aligns with the way our eyes scan the real world, making the image feel natural and engaging. When 2/3 of the frame can be dedicated to something other than the main subject, you can see more of the environment and understand how the environment is relating to the subject. Critics will look at examples of this technique and call out pieces that aren't exactly aligned with the grid. The lines act as a guideline, helping the artist understand where the thirds are. But really, this technique is describing where not to put subjects. Keep objects away from the very edge of the picture, in the corners, or directly in the center. The negative space balances the composition and gives a subject room to breathe. The use of rule of thirds should be guided by the story you want to tell, the balance you want to achieve, and the natural flow of the viewer's eye across the frame. Understanding the rule of thirds is crucial for knowing when to break it. Centering a subject can create a sense of power, isolation, or symmetry. Famous directors like Stanley Kubrick and cinematographers like Roger Deakins famously use centered compositions to evoke tension or bring out a scene's emotional weight. And there's no exact guideline on when to use and not use this technique. If your story or photo needs a feeling or emotion conveyed that can't be brought out using thirds, break away from the lines and tell the story however it can be told best.